Okay, there we go. All right. So we'll be starting here in the at the end of the first paragraph in the first chapter of Daniel. That'd be verse 8. And I want us to go back and remember where we were, because this is the history of this is extremely important in where it is in the time of Israel, and the time of Israel's captivity in Babylon, and especially the kingdom of Babylon, which is going to we're going to see Babylon again when we hit Revelation, and we're going to be neck deep in him. But remember, this is a time right at the end. The northern kingdom has already gone and scattered by the Assyrians. They're scattered all over the place. There's still there's still Jews up in the north, um, in all the tribal lands up in the northern kingdom, but there's not as many of them as there were. Assyria took a lot of them captive to slavery. They sold them out. They scattered them all across the Middle East, and probably even up into Europe and over into Africa. So the northern kingdoms are known to us at this time in history as the lost tribes, and they were scattered. They tended to lose most of their identity during this time. Um, the southern kingdom, though, was in better shape. They had a few more. Well, the northern kingdom had no good kings. If you're looking at your kings list, the northern kingdom had no good kings. The southern kingdom had good kings every now and then, and tended to keep its identity and keep the worship of the one true God. Not really good, but good enough. They kept, and in fact, when we look at this time period, the last few kings, and I mentioned them last week, and I'm reading right here off of my outline. The last few kings in the southern kingdom, Ammon was a idolater, uh, but his son Josiah was an exceptional an exceptional king, to the point where Ammon had at Ammon's reign, the people of the southern kingdom had lost, believe it or not, they had lost the book of the law. They lost the Torah. They did not have it. It was Josiah, Ammon's son, who found in the tabernacle, who found the book of the law that they had been just completely ignoring all for a couple of generations now. And it was such a an affair finding the book of the law. He took it out and read to the people out of the book of the law, and it was such a rejoicing and a revival time of Israel during the reign of Josiah, that things were really looking up. But he didn't have very good sons. Jehoaz was his son that took on the reign after Josiah died, and Josiah was good spiritual, a pretty good spiritual leader, but not a very good military one. Uh, Egypt had started to gain power and was banging on the southern door. And Josiah, he acquiesced to him. He did all the right things, and he was a reasonably powerful king, so Egypt didn't think it was a good idea to jump in right there. But when his son Jehoaz took over, Jehoaz was a dimwit, and just 3 months into his reign, the Egyptians came in and took Jehoaz off the throne and put Jehoiakim on the throne. Jehoiakim was a puppet king. He basically followed any god that he could find, and just was not a very good spiritual leader, nor a very good military leader. He was a puppet king. When Jehoiakim was deposed, his son Jehoiachin took over, but he only reigned 3 months before the Babylonians came calling. And at that point, the Babylonians took over. They put Zedekiah in on the throne. He was another puppet king, but Zedekiah was a little bit more, I want to say, savvy, but if he was real savvy, he would have known this wouldn't have worked. He led a rebellion against Nebuchadnezzar after he had been on the throne for a few years. Thought he could throw the Babylonians out. Didn't work out for him. And that is when Nebuchadnezzar came into Jerusalem and destroyed the temple in 586 BC. So we are now in the time of Daniel. Now Daniel was probably taken to Babylon during Jehoiakim's reign. He and his 3 friends were taken up there during that time. So Zedekiah was still down in Jerusalem when Daniel was up in Babylon. So going back in history a little bit, just to bring it back to our minds. So here we are. We read about the introduction here. We read in that first paragraph, the first 7 verses, about the end of the reign here. And now we're going to switch over to Daniel. So starting in verse 8, we're going to read the last half of the first chapter. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself. Well, let me go back a couple. Among these, back to verse 6, among these, the Babylonians, sorry, let me switch gears. The Babylonians were very clever when they dealt with, and Jerusalem was not the only people they did this to. The Babylonians were very clever. The Assyrians just came in, stomped on everything, took people captive, killed a bunch of folks, done. The Babylonians were not as brutal nor as kind of thick-headed. The Babylonians were very clever. When they came in, they did not just walk all over everything. Now, granted, they destroyed the temple, but they destroyed the temple to attack the God of Israel, who was now their enemy. So when they burned the temple, they were attacking the God, not the people. And you see in that first chapter, when you remember back, they took the best, the nobility, the royalty, the educated people in good physical shape. They took them up to Babylon, not as slaves. Exactly. They took them not as slaves, but as human capital, because they took the best and the brightest. And you see what they did to Daniel is they were feeding him. They were feeding him and his buddies. They put him in school in Babylon, the best schools that there were, to educate him. The Babylonians' idea of conquering was to assimilate the people that they conquered into the Babylonian culture, and that way they wouldn't have to watch them every minute. So that was their idea, is to assimilate the peoples that they conquered into their own culture. We pick it up there with the assimilation, and that's what we're looking at here in the second paragraph, is the assimilation. When they assimilated them, what they wanted to do was to take these highly intelligent folks, well versed in Hebrew culture. They wanted them to learn Babylonian culture, learn Babylonian food, learn Babylonian customs, and eventually begin to forget about who they were back there and begin to be Babylonians. So that's what we're looking at here in the second paragraph. Now I'll start to read. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food. Remember, they were getting the king's portion of food, nor with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And in the chief of the eunuchs, Daniel said, I fear my lord the king who assigned, or the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king who assigned your food and drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. So the chief eunuch, and this expression eunuch here is not necessarily a castrated male. This and remember, the first chapter of Daniel is in Hebrew. When we get to the second chapter, we switch to Aramaic, and we stay in Aramaic until the 8th chapter, and then we switch back to Hebrew, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The word in Hebrew there is not necessarily a castrated male. It is a title. It is a title. Now remember, we're dealing with the Babylonians, and we're trying to put Hebrew words on things in Babylon, so it's not a good match. And most of the scholarship doesn't think that this was a castrated male here. They think that this was an attempt to transliterate the title of this chief of the guards here that we're talking about. So the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king. And he went through because he was afraid. This guy was in charge of these folks, and these were not throwaway slaves. These were important capital, human capital to the king of Babylon. He wanted them in good shape and ready to learn. And the guy is saying, if you don't eat this food, you're gonna not do well, and the king is not going to look very kindly on me. So Daniel says to the steward, whom who the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Daniel speaking now. Test your servants. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them, he the chief eunuch. He listened to them in this manner and tested them for 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in the flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and wine the wine they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. Daniel did not want to defile himself with the Babylonians' food. This was not because it was bad food. In fact, it was very, very good food, but there was a big problem with it. Generally, especially the meat, was sacrificed to the god, just like Israel did. You remember, I'm sorry, we haven't done Leviticus. The Levitican sacrifices, some of the meat sacrifices, the animal sacrifices, are made entirely to God. The animal is sacrificed. The portions of the meat are divided. Some of the uh, uh, less, some of the more repulsive parts are burned, but some of the others are presented on the altar and burned so that they're completely consumed and they are offering to God. Other types of sacrifices are some of the meat is offered to God, but the other portions of the meat are, depending upon the type of sacrifices, the the person that brought the sacrifice is given the portion that is not God's. So the person that is making the offering or the sacrifice is given back a, a goodly portion of the meat that they sacrificed, but it's sacrificed to God. This was not an uncommon thing around the Middle East, that they sacrificed meat to the gods. They thought the gods were eating this. The Hebrews, they had they had no idea that God was not eating this. This was a sacrifice to God. He told them to do this. They were doing it for that reason. They did not think God was eating this. This was a sacrifice to him. The smoke went up to him. He smelled it, and it was a pleasing aroma to him. But in Babylon, the meat was sacrificed to whatever Babylonian god, this guy or this one, whoever made the sacrifice, their personal god. They make that sacrifice, then a portion of the meat is brought back, and the king and his court share it. That is what Daniel was worried about. When it says Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food, is what they're talking about. This food was offered to a foreign god, and that is badly looked upon by the one God. You cannot, and Paul says the same thing in the New Testament. Do not eat food sacrificed to idols. I mean, this is a long held rule for the Hebrews. Do not eat food sacrificed to an idol. This also goes to some of the grain offerings that they made, some of the bread that they offered. That's why Daniel only wanted to eat vegetables and water, because vegetables weren't sacrificed to the gods. They weren't offered to the gods. So vegetables were okay, water is okay. Wine was also sacrificed to the gods. So that's what Daniel is not defiling himself in, is food that is offered to the gods. It's not necessarily this is an unkosher food. That they may have had pork. They probably did. So Daniel couldn't eat that meat because it is not food. Pork is not considered food. That's the reason God said you do not eat of animals with cloven hooves or that does not chew the cud. That is not food. You don't eat it. That's all that says. It's not food. You eat cows, lambs, goats. That's food. Pig, pork, that's not food. So that Daniel did not want to defile himself, and he held the line on this. He was not going to be assimilated into the culture. And that is one of the critical things here, that Daniel and his three friends were not going to assimilate. They were, however, going to study. They did not say, we're not going to study. And as we'll see later on, in Daniel, they became very well educated in Babylonian customs, legends, and their scriptures. They knew the Babylonians. They knew them very well, but they did not assimilate into that culture. They kept their Hebrew identity, and it is symbolized, what the Bible is telling us, that it is symbolized by Daniel and Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah's stand against not taking the king's food. So that first paragraph there is showing us the determination of Daniel not to lose his identity in Babylon. As we also see later on in Daniel, a lot of the Hebrews lost their identity and stayed in Babylon after they went back and became part of the Babylonian culture. Some of the Jews stayed in Babylon, but they never lost their identity. Not many, but some of them did. Daniel was one of them. Daniel stayed in Babylon after they went back to Jerusalem. He stayed there for a really, really good reason. We'll see that later on, too. So, we'll pick up any questions on that first paragraph and why Daniel was so adamant about not eating the king's food. He went to his school, but he would not eat the king's food. Any questions there before I go on? Okay. Verse 17. As for these four youths, God gave them, and this is important, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them none other was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king. And in every manner of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. King Cyrus was a Mede. That's the next kingdom, and we're about to find out about that. So God gave them a gift of wisdom to learn the Babylonian culture, to learn about the Babylonians so that they would understand how to deal with them and the Babylonian gods.
Hey, Norm.
Yes,
I got a little, I got a praise.
sure.
Not a, it's not little, it's a big
A
praise.
big.
But I remember when I was working uh, on Asphalt Enterprises, I didn't know how to do something. And this guy was showing me time after time after time how to do it. And I still could not wrap my head around it. And I went and I prayed. I prayed about it. Lord, please show me how to do it. And he gave me this guy gave me a cheat sheet on how to do it. But, it's doing some formulas and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I went and I prayed, because using the cheat sheet isn't
Yeah.
efficient. And the Lord gave me that knowledge just like that. He sure did. He gave me that knowledge, that understanding of how to do it. I just wanted to share that. That's why I love that verse
Yeah.
there in Daniel.
And that is hugely important, and it's also dangerous. Um, when you study the enemy, when you study the enemy, that's a very razor's edge you walk there. Now, of course, Kim's not studying the enemy. Kim is not studying the enemy, but God gave her that gift that opened her mind, and she's all of a sudden able to understand this. But studying the enemy is a very treacherous path because you see, the Babylonians wanted Daniel to become one of them, and they fed him well and they treated him well. There were all sorts of earthly pleasures and smells and people to talk to. there was all manner of temptation right there to say, just come on over to our side, bud, it'll be okay. That's a huge, huge temptation. So in Kim's case, yeah, the God gave her a tremendous shot of wisdom there to pick that up. And I'm sure all of us have seen times in our lives when we banged our head against the wall to try and learn something new, new job, new church, new Sunday school class. We try and learn, and it just won't come. And if we, like Kim says, if we sit still, be still, and listen for God's voice, He's more than likely going to come in and help us out with these understandings. And that's that. God gave Daniel and Mishael and Hananiah and Azariah this huge gift to understand this, to bring their stature in front of the king, to raise them up. Now, I wanted to mention something um, about Daniel and how you see how he is just, in the eyes of the king, he has begun to, to rise up. There is a chapter of Daniel that is in some Bibles. It is not, it's in the Ethiopian Bible, it's in a couple of the others. It's not a standard chapter in most standard Bibles, but it does come from the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament. If you look in the Septuagint, you actually find it as a separate chapter, but it's only like 2.5 pages. But it's sometimes called chapter 0 in Daniel. But if you read this chapter 0 in Daniel, this is a story about how Daniel's fame began to grow in Babylon. It's a story about a woman named Susanna who was a very beautiful woman married to a very upright man, Jehoiakim. And what happened to Susanna was basically sort of like the woman caught in adultery, except Susanna was not caught in adultery. In fact, she was ready to die other than to sleep with these two priests that fell in lust with her. She was ready to die. The priest accused her of sleeping with them and brought her up on adultery, and she was going to be executed. Sound familiar? Woman found in adultery? Well, yeah. And guess who came to her rescue? Not the Son of God, but Daniel. It was Daniel who was brought by the Hebrew culture there to judge this woman. And Daniel judged the woman by trapping the two priests. And the two priests basically got what what they deserved. The last verse of that is Hilkiah and his wife praised God for their daughter Susanna with Joachim her husband and all her relatives because she was found innocent of any shameful deed. And from that day onward, Daniel was greatly esteemed by the people. That's how that chapter leads. So Daniel's esteem was beginning to, already was in the background, starting to rise, and now he's in school, he's doing well. He is somewhat of a phenomenon in Babylon, and a real prize if Nebuchadnezzar can win him over and he becomes Nebuchadnezzar's right-hand man. So we've set the story now. Like I said, the first chapter is written in Hebrew. The second chapter through the seventh, we switch over to Aramaic. Aramaic is the language of culture at this time, sort of like Greek was in Jesus's time. Greek was the language of business, the language of the cosmopolitan people, the travelers. Everybody spoke Greek that was somebody, um, especially travelers, merchantmen who had to deal with a lot of people. English is that way now. English is the language of commerce. If you go over to a business meeting in Germany or in Dubai, people are going to be speaking English generally. It's the language of commerce, and that's what it is here. It's the common language. In Babylon, it was the language of the businessman. So we're switching over now from Hebrew, who's telling in Hebrew we're telling the history. Now we switch over to Nebuchadnezzar and we're speaking in Aramaic. So now we have a subtle switch. All right, I'm going to start reading in the second chapter, and we'll go down to about the 11th verse. In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. When the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king, and the king said to them, I've had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic. Now that's a weird thing. The Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic. Why is it, everybody's speaking Aramaic, but why did we get that? Why did the Bible tell us when then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic? This is probably a big clue here. The Chaldeans were a very well educated elite group, very high society. They had their nose in the air. These were the movers and thinkers. You think of Washington, D.C., that's the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans were a very elite class, and you see they were the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, the tellers of the future, the people that you came to for answers. These were the elite people. The Chaldeans did not speak Aramaic. Well, they spoke it, but the Chaldean language was Akkadian. So the Chaldeans are speaking to the king in Aramaic. So it's kind of led anybody who's looking here and got a kind of a good head on their shoulders. The king probably didn't speak Aramaic or didn't speak it very well. And the elite guys are saying, well, the king is not quite as well educated as we are, so we'll speak to him in the common language. So that's the kind of feel we want to get in our heads about these Chaldeans. Sound like another group of people in the first century, right? Yeah. The Pharisees and Sadducees. Yeah. Sounds like the elite, and we all have them. Like I said, Washington, D.C., that's our Chaldeans. So, verse 4, then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, look for little things like that don't exact that, what is that doing there? Why did they watch for things like that? Because God put them in there for a reason, and he put that in there to jar us awake and make us think. Why did God say that? Oh, that's probably it. The Chaldeans thought they were a little better than the king. So we pick up. They said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation. All right, tell us the dream. We got this for you. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be laid in ruins. But if you show the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and its interpretation. King's not having any of it. I think the king is a little bit smarter than they thought he was. He's obviously been led by these people, the Chaldeans, a little bit wrong more than once. And at this point, this dream really shook him. And yeah, his other dreams, they might have told him, oh, it looks like you'll meet a tall, dark woman in the tavern tonight. And, you know, a lot of his dreams probably didn't make a whole lot of difference. So he didn't think a whole lot about it. But this one has got his attention. And he wants an answer. And he wants an answer from somebody who he knows is going to give him the right answer. Verse 7. They, the Chaldeans, answered a second time and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show its interpretation. The king answered and said to them, I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time, because you see that the word from me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the times change. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. All right, the Chaldeans are in a real hole now. Verse 10, the Chaldeans answered the king, there is not a man on the earth who can meet the king's demand, for no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. So the Chaldeans finally have to fess up and say, there is no way we can tell you the dream. There is no way a human knows. A human does not know somebody else's mind. So they're in a deep hole. Verse 12, next paragraph. Because of this, the king was angry and very furious, and he commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. Whoops. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought, look at that, and they, the wise men, sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the king of the captain of the king's guards, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree of the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel, and Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king. So these guys, the king's guard went out to take care of these wise men right away, and they went to Daniel first, and Daniel knew something bad was happening, so he apparently had enough pull with Arioch, the king's guard, to request some time from him. So, next paragraph. Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. And he told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the mystery was revealed. Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought I'd turned too many pages. And his companions might not be destroyed with the wise men of Babylon. So Daniel immediately goes to his friends and asks all four of them now to pray to God for deliverance. So they begin to pray, and look at what he says. And his companions, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. He's also thinking of these other poor guys that are going to get killed too. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven, and he answered and said, and this is the little hymn of Daniel here, and we're about out of time, so I think I'm going to stop. Right there. Daniel blessed the God of heaven. It came to him in a vision of the night. Now this is different. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and saw this vision. The vision didn't come out of Nebuchadnezzar's head. It came from God. God put that vision, that dream in his head. Daniel, however, had a vision of the night. They're two different words. Dream and vision are two different words. So Daniel saw this in a vision at night. It was not a dream. He was not asleep. This is a vision of the night. And Daniel blessed the God of heaven, and he sings this song. So we start now. We're about to see the big thing here. The statue of Nebuchadnezzar's dream has been argued over for centuries. So here we are. We're standing. We're gonna take up the statue next week. Do you have any questions right now before we break up? We're gonna start with Daniel's Daniel's psalm Daniel's psalm there in verse 20. Daniel answered and said, "Blessed is the name of God forever." Any questions before we go into the vision?
So what's the difference between a dream and vision?
In a dream, you're asleep. Nebuchadnezzar was asleep, and he saw this in a dream, just like me or you. Daniel was not asleep. A vision is not. You're not asleep. He just saw it in a vision of the night. He was at night when he saw this vision. So Daniel was probably praying, and we see that in yeah, we're going to see it again. Daniel has another one later on here, and it's in the daytime. But a vision is when you're not asleep, and you see things that are, maybe they're there, but maybe not. But you're seeing a vision, and this one was at night. So yeah, Daniel was not asleep. Nebuchadnezzar was. A dream and a vision.
Is it more like a daydream?
Yeah, yeah, it's more like a daydream. Yeah, that's right. You know how in algebra class in high school, and you're looking out that window. How many times you can tell this is I'm a pro at this. You're looking out that window and you're thinking what you're going to do when that bell rings. And you can almost see yourself heading out there onto the soccer field to play. Yep, it's just like a daydream, except this daydream not coming out of your head, it's coming from God.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good one, Kim. Thank you for that.
Well, actually, Jeff was the one that
Right.
asked. I was just
Jeff got it. So kudos, Jeff. Yeah, it's like a daydream. It's like a daydream, Bonnie.
Because Jeff is smart.
Yes.
And he
I
was
need
probably
the dummy book.
Jeff was probably sitting in algebra too, looking out the window, figuring on him somewhere else too.
I just got to math class.
Yeah.
I got the algebra true too.
Yeah,
Had to take it, and I cried.
those were rough days. Um, Next week, I think I will remember to talk about premillennial, amillennial, and postmillennial real quick before we get into this one. But other than that, we're almost out of time. Thanks everybody for being here, and read on into the second chapter. Start reading the second chapter.
Yeah, God bless y'all.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Thank
lot,
you.
Y'all have a
everybody.
good week.
Have a great
Thank
week.
you, Norm.
Yep.
Thank you,
Have a
Norm.
good week.
You too.
You too.